Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where the ground itself is the library, where history is not stacked on shelves but pressed into mud, baked by accident and rescued by chance. You are standing at the edge of southern Mesopotamia with night air on your face and damp river smell in your nose, watching a flat horizon that looks peaceful until you notice it never truly stops moving. Reeds sway, water shivers, insects hum like tiny engines. Somewhere out there, a jackal gives a lazy opinion about your life choices. And here is your cheerful reality check. You probably will not survive this, not because a monster jumps you from a shadow, but because the basics will bully you. Heat that feels personal, water that looks innocent and still makes you sick, work that begins before sunrise and ends when your arms stop negotiating. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with clay. Not heroic clay, not magical clay, just the stubborn grey-brown paste that cakes your ankles when you step too close to the canal edge. This is the material that will outlast palaces. Wood rots. Cloth becomes dust. Even stone can be stolen and reused. But clay once dried becomes the quietest witness on earth. A thumbprint becomes a timestamp. A fingernail groove becomes a signature. A slip of mud becomes a message that can sleep for thousands of years and still wake up readable. Mainstream fact, the kind you can safely say at a dinner party without someone pulling out a conspiracy podcast. The earliest writing we can recognize as Sumerian cuneiform develops in ancient Mesopotamia in the late 4th millennium BCE, and it begins as record-keeping, not epic poetry. You do not invent writing because you feel poetic. You invent it because somebody owes somebody else barley, and nobody trusts anybody's memory. You can almost hear the first accountant in history whispering with holy seriousness, "I am not mad. I just want it in writing." But you are not here yet for the fully formed wedge marks. You are earlier than the story most people tell when they jump straight to the Anunnaki. You are in the soft zone before the big names, before the loud myths, before the official voices say, "This is how it started." Your job tonight is to listen to the parts that sound like they are muttering under their breath. So you walk along a settlement edge, not a grand city yet, more like a cluster of mud brick rooms clinging to a slightly higher patch of ground. The river can be a friend or a landlord. It gives water, but it also takes rent in the form of floods. You notice how everything is made for survival, not beauty. There is beauty anyway, because humans cannot help themselves. A reed mat woven tighter than it needs to be. A pot with a little extra curve. A small bead strung on fibre. Even in a place where hunger is a regular visitor, people still decorate the door for company. You also notice the soundscape. Soft slaps of wet clay, the clink of stone tools, children running, not because they are carefree, but because running is how you grow into legs that can haul water later, A woman is grinding grain, the rhythm steady, the kind of rhythm that could hypnotize you if you let it. Somewhere inside a cooking fire breathes smoke that smells like earth and char. Now the phrase you are hunting for without saying it, like a headline, is the reveal that something existed before the arrival story begins. This is where it gets tricky, because what you have is not a single tablet that says, "Hello, we were here first, signed the pre-Anunnaki." What you have is a pattern, a set of human habits, a landscape that forces certain choices, a society that becomes complex because complexity is the only way to survive in a place where water is both blessing and threat. Quirky tidbit time, because every bedtime needs one weird snack. In early Mesopotamia, seals become a kind of portable identity. Imagine a small carved cylinder you roll across wet clay to leave your personal design, like a signature that also works as a security system. It is basically an ancient version of signing into your account, except you cannot forget your password, because your password is a tiny carved sheep and a star and a guy with impressive eyebrows. If you lose your seal, you do not just lose a trinket. You lose your proof that you are you, which is a terrifying concept even now, and you do not even have customer support. You pause near a storage area and you understand something important. Before gods arrive in stories, administrators arrive in real life. Before the cosmic drama, there is the drama of supplies. Who gets grain? Who gets oil? Who works? Who rests? Who claims a portion? Who controls the measurement stones? If you want a society that later tells myths about powerful beings organizing labor, you first need a society already obsessed with organizing labor. You do not need aliens to invent the idea of a work schedule. Humans will happily do that to themselves the moment there is a surplus worth arguing about. Still, the whispers in the tradition are interesting. Sumerian literature, when it comes later, loves to frame beginnings as if something was arranged, set in place, assigned, measured. The world gets its duties, the rivers get their beds, the fields get their boundaries, the gods get their temples. It feels like a cosmic zoning commission, and you standing here at the edge of a settlement that is literally negotiating with water and mud every day can see why. When your life depends on boundaries, you start imagining the universe as a system of boundaries too. Historians still argue whether the earliest urban growth in southern Mesopotamia is driven more by temple institutions or by household-based networks of power and exchange. In other words, did the temple pull people in like a magnet, organizing labor and food, or did families and local leaders build complexity first, with temples later formalizing it? The debate matters because it changes how you interpret those later stories. If temples are the engine, then myths about divine order read like propaganda for institutions. If households and local networks lead, then myths read more like a shared attempt to explain the chaos of rapid change. You keep moving and you find the real reveal, the one that is not flashy but is stubborn. The reveal is that the world before the big mythic arrivals is already a world of invention. People are already making canals, managing seasonal floods, domesticating plants, breeding animals, mapping fields, negotiating labour trading across distances, developing symbols, and building social hierarchies. The stage is not empty, the stage is crowded with human effort. And yet, because humans are humans, effort always comes with storytelling. Someone points at the sky and says the stars are watching. Someone points at the river and says it has moods. Someone points at the temple storehouse and says the grain belongs to the divine, which is a very convenient way to say it belongs to the people in charge of the divine. You're already seeing the seed of later epics, not in the sense of plot, but in the sense of mindset. A need to explain why this place is hard, why order is fragile, why survival feels like a contract you have to renew every morning. You stop at a quiet corner where a child is pressing a finger into a lump of wet clay, making little dents, not writing, just playing. But even that play is a rehearsal, a future scribe practicing without knowing it, a future worker learning that marks matter. You watch the finger lift, leaving a tiny hollow. You imagine how generations later a wedge-shaped reed stylus will press into clay with intention, turning hollows into meaning. And you let the thoughts settle softly like dust, settling after footsteps. Before any story claims visitors arrive to shape humanity, humanity is already shaping itself, one canal, one ration, one mark in clay at a time. The older world is not a mystery hidden behind a locked door. It is a muddy, sweaty, ingenious human world that later myths will decorate with stars and names. You breathe in the river air again. It is cooler now. The settlement's noises become a low blur. Clay dries. Fires dim. Somewhere a dog sighs as if it has read the future and is not impressed. You keep walking deeper into the night, following the quiet trail of early memory, because the ground is still whispering and you are finally listening. The night air stays warm, but it softens as you move away from the cooking fires and toward the darker edges of memory. You are still in the same flat land, still surrounded by water channels and reed beds, but the feeling changes. It is like stepping from a room full of voices into a hallway where you can hear the building settling. This is the hallway of the story, the part people do not decorate as much because it is uncomfortable. You feel it in the way the ground is layered. Every step is over old footprints. Every raised mound is a stack of abandoned floors rebuilt again and again. In this landscape, ruin is not the end of a place. It is just the base layer for the next version of the place. And that is where the earliest Sumerian memory likes to begin. Not with a sunrise, but with what comes after a drowning. Mainstream historical fact. Delivered gently like a bedtime snack, you can actually digest southern Mesopotamia is a floodplain shaped by the Tigris and Euphrates river systems, and seasonal flooding is a constant feature of life there, sometimes helpful for agriculture, sometimes destructive for settlements. People build levees, dig canals and raise their houses on platforms, partly because the rivers do not care about your schedule. Now imagine living with that for generations. Flooding stops being just weather. It becomes a personality in your world. You start speaking about water like it has intentions. You start using flood as a metaphor for moral failure, cosmic imbalance, or divine correction. Even if you are the most practical farmer on earth, your brain still wants a reason. Your brain is allergic to random disaster. It will invent meaning the way your body invents sweat. So you trudge through an imagined memory that later scribes will shape into legend. You come to a time when people talk about a great flood, not as a single stormy afternoon, but as an event so big it resets the story. And here you enter the famous in-between space. After the flood, before the kings. After the chaos, before the lists and the titles and the official order. The detail that matters is not whether the flood story matches one exact historical flood event. Historians still argue whether the great flood traditions preserve a memory of a specific catastrophic regional flood, or whether they are a stitched tapestry made from many floods across centuries, braided into one dramatic tale. Either way, the narrative function is the same. The flood becomes the line on the map. Everything before it feels ancient and weird. Everything after it feels like the world you recognize. You stand in that gap. The air tastes like wet earth and raw clay. The settlement you picture is smaller, scrappier, more temporary. People are not carving grand claims. They are trying to stay alive. In a floodplain, rebuilding is not romantic. It is logistical. You need mud brick. You need reeds. You need a raised platform. You need to find where the canal shifted. You need to argue with your neighbour about boundaries that the flood erased. Nothing brings out the petty side of humanity like a river moving your fence line. You can almost hear the first arguments of the new world. Who owns what now? Who gets to claim the highest ground? Who controls the water gate? Who decides when the canal is opened? And then, because humans are also exhausting, you can also hear the first attempt at making this feel less petty by wrapping it in sacred language. This is where the notion of kingship becomes important. Later, Sumerian tradition loves the idea that kingship is something that descends as if authority drops from the sky like a gift package. It is a beautiful idea. It is also the kind of idea you create when you want your political structure to feel inevitable. If kingship arrives from above, you do not have to admit it was assembled from arguments, alliances, and sharp elbows. Quirky tidbit. Because your sleepy brain deserves one early Mesopotamian people use clay tokens to represent quantities of goods long before full writing takes off. Little shapes can stand in for sheep jars of oil, measures of grain. Think of it as prehistoric accounting, a tabletop game where the prize is not fun, but keeping track of who owes what. Later on, some of these tokens end up sealed inside clay envelopes with markings on the outside to indicate what is inside, which is like inventing paperwork and security seals at the same time. Humans truly cannot resist building bureaucracy even when they do not have proper chairs yet. You walk through the gap again and you notice the tone of the earliest memories. It is not cosy, it is not dreamy. It is anxious. The world feels recently repaired. The rules feel new. People are watching each other. People are watching the water. People are watching the sky. And the big reveal hidden inside these flood and kingship traditions is simple. Sumerian identity is built around the idea that order is not natural, order is work. That is why lists matter. That is why names matter. That is why measuring matters. The post-flood world is a world where people want to pin things down, to label them to make the universe feel less slippery than mud after rain. You find yourself near a communal gathering, maybe near the edge of a temple platform that is still being built up layer by layer. There is a leader here, not necessarily a king yet, maybe a war leader, maybe an organizer, maybe the person with the best network of relatives. He speaks about rebuilding. He speaks about fairness. He speaks about offerings to keep the powers happy. And you notice something that is both ancient and extremely modern. The speech is half practical, plan, half morale management. People do not just need food. They need to feel like rebuilding means something. So the story grows. The flood becomes a moral event. The rebuilding becomes sacred duty. The leader becomes chosen. The authority becomes not just human negotiation, but cosmic arrangement. And that is where the Anunnaki idea later finds a comfortable seat. If you already believe that big shifts in human order come from above, then it is easy to imagine a moment when powerful beings arrive and set things right, or set things into motion, or depending on your mood, set things on fire. The point tonight is that the mental framework is already there. Long before anyone says a specific name, the culture is already explaining social change with a vertical story. Things descend, authority descends, knowledge descends, rules descend. If you are living in a floodplain where water descends from upstream, with no warning, the metaphor basically writes itself. Historians still argue whether early kingship in Mesopotamia emerges primarily as a response to warfare and competition between settlements, or as a managerial response to irrigation and large-scale labour organisation. It can be both, of course, because humans are capable of multitasking their problems. But the emphasis matters. If warfare is the driver, kings are protectors and conquerors. If irrigation is the driver, kings are managers of water and labour. Either way, the post-flood gap is where the job description starts forming. Now your footsteps slow. You reach a quiet stretch where the only sound is water moving through reeds and the distant low murmur of people settling in for sleep. You feel the soft weight of the reveal resting on you. Before the big cosmic arrivals that later readers love to talk about, the land already has a story structure. Disaster, reset, rebuilding, authority, order. The pre-arrival world is not blank. It is already arranging itself into a narrative humans can live inside. And you, half awake, half drifting, let that narrative move you forward. Not as a dramatic cliffhanger, not as a trailer for something else, but as a steady current. Floodwater recedes. Mud dries, new walls rise, names begin to stick, power finds a shape. The gap closes not with thunder, but with the quiet click of a society deciding to remember itself in a particular way. Morning does not arrive like a romantic painting. It arrives like a duty. A pale light spreads over the floodplain, and the air immediately starts warming up as if the sun is preheating the world for your suffering. You blink grit from your eyes and realise the ground is already busy. Even the birds look employed. This is the era when survival is not a dramatic quest, it is a schedule, and you unlucky traveller have been drafted. You follow the footpaths that cut through low fields and higher ridges of settled ground. The smell is a mix of damp, silt-crushed reeds and smoke that clings to everything. You pass patches of barley not tall enough yet to hide anything, but dense enough to promise food if the water behaves. The miracle is not that people build cities later. The miracle is that they manage to feed themselves at all in a land that alternates between generous and cruel without asking permission. Mainstream historical fact, steady and true, agriculture and animal domestication in the broader Near East begin earlier, but in southern Mesopotamia, large-scale irrigation agriculture becomes central to life as communities expand, using canals and levees to manage water in a relatively dry environment. The landscape is flat, the rivers are unpredictable, and the only way to make this place reliable is to force reliability into it with labour. And labour is what you feel in your bones. You stand beside a canal that looks simple until you notice how many hands it takes to keep it alive. Silt builds up, weeds choke the flow, banks collapse, gates break. Every season demands repair. The canal is not just a ditch, it is a living agreement between people and water. You do not farm here alone, you farm as a social animal, or you do not farm at all. You watch a group of workers wading into the channel using baskets to scoop mud, piling it onto the bank. Someone shouts instructions. Someone complains. Someone laughs at the complaint, because if you do not laugh, you start crying and then your eyes sting all day. You feel the ancient rhythm of coordinated work, the kind that turns strangers into a unit. And you realise something important about the world before the Anunnaki arrival story becomes popular in modern imagination. If you can mobilise dozens or hundreds of people to dig and maintain canals, you already have organisation, you already have leadership, you already have planning, you already have timekeeping, you already have the ability to measure and allocate. You do not need a mysterious outsider to teach you that water must be guided. The water teaches you, ruthlessly, repeatedly. Quirky tidbit. The kind that sounds too strange to be true, but fits perfectly in a human world. Archaeologists have found evidence that ancient Mesopotamians used bitumen, a natural asphalt, to waterproof boats and structures. Imagine smearing black tar-like substance on reeds and wood, so your boat does not become an instant sponge. It probably smells like a headache and sticks to everything you love. But it works. You can picture someone stepping in it by accident and then doing the oldest dance in history, the hop hop panic shuffle, while everybody pretends not to laugh and then absolutely laughs. You move from the canal to the granary area. The grain is life. Grain is payment. Grain is stability. Grain is also the reason people start arguing in more sophisticated ways. Once you have stored food, you have the concept of tomorrow. And once you have tomorrow, you also have the concept of theft, debt, interest, and jealousy. Congratulations, civilization. You see a man with a measuring vessel carefully pouring grain into a container, levelling the top with a stick. Measurements are power. Whoever controls the standard controls the story of fairness. You can already feel the future scribes itching to mark this down, not because they love poetry, but because the grain must be counted. The earliest reveal in this era is that counting becomes destiny. Now, as you walk, you notice the changing relationship between humans and the wild. The wild is not gone, it is pushed to the edges. The marshes still hide birds and fish. The plains still hold grazing animals. Predators still test the boundary of the settlement. But the human footprint is becoming heavier. Fields replace brush. Canals slice through land like veins. Herds move under supervision. The world is being reshaped. This is where later myths about outside shapers and designers find fertile ground. When you live in a place where your entire survival depends on reshaping nature, your mind starts imagining that you are part of an even larger reshaping. If you can straighten a canal, maybe someone straightened the world. If you can assign labour, maybe someone assigned your labour too. It is a psychological mirror. Historians still argue whether early irrigation in southern Mesopotamia causes environmental problems like soil salinisation quickly enough to shape social change, or whether communities adapt for long periods before it becomes a major crisis. Salt is the slow enemy. Water brings life, but it also carries minerals. Over time, salts accumulate in the soil and fields become less productive. If you want a reason to believe that a powerful force intervenes in human affairs, a slow, invisible enemy like salt is perfect fuel. It feels like a curse. It feels like punishment. It feels like the land itself is changing its mind about feeding you. You walk along a field edge and see how fragile the system is. A broken gate, one late repair, one poorly timed flood, and a season's effort becomes mud soup. A drought can turn a canal into a useless scar. The constant pressure makes people inventive. They develop tools. They develop schedules. They develop social rules. They develop rituals. They develop the habit of looking to the sky and asking, "Are you going to cooperate today, or are you going to ruin us for entertainment?" And then you see the most important transformation, the shift from family survival to communal infrastructure. When the system grows, it demands administrators. It demands planners. It demands people who do not just dig but direct. And those directors, whether they sit in a temple courtyard or in a leader's house, start becoming a distinct social group. Here is your gentle joke break, because your brain deserves it. You can think of the first administrators as the original group chat moderators. They do not farm as much. They watch. They count. They decide. They remind everyone of the rules. They also mysteriously always have more snacks. You stand in the heat and feel the sweaty logic of it all. Farming is not just growing food, it is building a system. And the reveal that emerges from this section is that by the time later texts talk about great beings arriving to impose order, humans have already been imposing order on themselves for a very long time. The Anunnaki story. Whatever you believe it means enters a world already structured by canals, measurements, labour teams, and the quiet, relentless mathematics of survival. As the sun climbs your steps slow, the air vibrates with the insects. Somewhere a worker curses softly at a stubborn clump of mud, then remembers the children nearby and replaces the curse with a disappointed sigh, which is basically the ancient version of being PG-13. You keep moving, not because you are eager, but because the land keeps pulling you forward. The fields ripple in the breeze. The canal water glints. The granary door creaks. And civilization, still young, still messy, still human, continues building itself out of mud, sweat, and the stubborn refusal to starve. By late afternoon, the light turns syrupy, and the whole floodplain looks like it is melting into gold. The heat does not leave, it just changes its tone from sharp to heavy, like the air is draped over your shoulders. You follow a path of packed earth that rises a little above the fields, and ahead of you the shape of a temple platform begins to dominate the horizon. It is not a skyscraper, not some shining monument, but it has that same feeling of intent. Humans have decided this spot will be higher than the rest. Humans have decided this is where the world meets the divine, or at least where the paperwork meets the offerings. You step closer and notice the quiet precision of the place. Mud brick walls are stacked with care. Reed mats cover work areas to keep dust down. Storage rooms are tucked into corners, like the ribs of the structure. People move in and out carrying jars, baskets, bundles. There is labour here, but it has a different flavour than canal work. This labour feels supervised. It feels counted. Mainstream historical fact. The kind that anchors you. Temples in early Mesopotamian cities function not only as religious centres, but also as economic institutions, organising labour, storing surplus, and redistributing food and goods. This is one of the reasons cities can grow. A temple is not just a place you pray, it is a machine that turns surplus into power. You watch a line of workers bringing in grain. The baskets look heavy enough to compress a person's soul. Someone at the entrance checks the load, not with a smile, but with the expression of a person who has learned that a smile invites negotiation. There is a system here. A record is being made, maybe not yet, with full writing, but with tokens, tallies, seals, and memory reinforced by ritual. And here is where the reveal gets sharp. This is the section where you realise how quickly a sacred space becomes a financial space. You are not in a modern bank, but you can smell the same logic. Goods go in, goods come out, promises are tracked, duties are assigned. And the moment duties are assigned, the moment food is redistributed, the moment someone can say, you have the birth of debt. Debt is not always evil. In a fragile environment, debt can be a lifeline. You borrow seed grain now and repay after harvest. You receive rations during drought and repay with labour later. The problem, as you already know in your modern bones, is that debt can become a trap if the terms are controlled by the powerful. You walk through a courtyard and see a group of people waiting with small offerings, a jar of oil, a bundle of reeds, a few fish from the marsh. They are not just pious, they are participating in a system. They are paying in hoping to receive protection, favour, stability. They are also, whether they admit it or not, funding the institution that will regulate them. Quirky tidbit time. Some Mesopotamian medical and magical practices involve ingredients that sound like a bizarre grocery list from a haunted kitchen. Things like animal parts, plants, minerals, and sometimes substances you would rather not picture too vividly. You can almost imagine a temple healer nodding seriously and saying, yes, the remedy requires a specific kind of river mud and a pinch of ash, and do not ask questions, just trust me. Even in serious institutions, humans cannot resist mixing science, superstition and vibes. Now you notice the people who are not hauling baskets. They stand in shade. They talk softly. They watch. They carry tablets or clay lumps or seals. Their hands are not as calloused. Their eyes are sharp. These are the early specialists, the administrative class forming inside a sacred shell. One of them presses a seal into a clay stopper on a jar. That seal says, this belongs to the temple, or this belongs to this official, or this belongs to the system. It is a tiny moment, but it changes the world. Ownership becomes markable. Control becomes repeatable. If the seal says you control the jar, then the seal also says you control what is inside the jar, and eventually you control the people who need what is inside the jar. Historians still argue whether temple institutions are the primary driver of early social stratification in southern Mesopotamia, or whether inequality grows from multiple sources such as trade warfare and household-based wealth accumulation. In other words, is the temple the main engine, or is it one engine among many? But standing here watching the flow of goods, you cannot miss how convenient sacred authority is as a justification for economic authority. You step into a cooler room and the air smells like stored grain and clay. On the floor are stacks of containers. Along the walls are jars sealed with clay stoppers. A worker counts them under his breath. Another worker adjusts a list of tokens. The rhythm is hypnotic, like someone counting sheep, except the sheep are actually grain rations, and your sleep depends on whether the numbers match. Here comes your light joke break, because you need it. Imagine telling someone in this era that one day people will carry tiny glowing rectangles and use them to buy things without touching grain or oil at all. They would stare at you like you are possessed and then ask the only reasonable question: can it also dig canals? No, it cannot. So they would return to their work unimpressed by your future. You leave the storage room and notice the social choreography outside. A group of workers receives rations, perhaps bread and beer, because yes, beer is part of the story here. In early Mesopotamia, beer is not just a party drink. It is a staple, a safer source of hydration than raw river water in many cases, and it becomes a ration item for labourers. Mainstream fact for your brain to hold beer and bread are central dietary staples, and beer production is woven into economic life. That makes the temple even more powerful. It can feed you, it can hydrate you, it can assign you, it can forgive your obligations or tighten them. And once you have obligations, you have the beginnings of legal thinking, even if it is not written down in full yet. The reveal in this section is not a secret message hidden in a tablet. It is the visible birth of institutional control. Before any later tale claims, sky beings arrived to organize human labor, Humans already build institutions that organise human labour, and they do it with the tools they have: surplus sacred authority seals and the simple leverage of rations. You step out into the courtyard again. The sun is lower, shadows stretch. A priest chants softly somewhere, and the sound blends with the clatter of jars and the shuffling of feet. Religion and economy are not separate here. They are braided. The braid tightens with every harvest. You look at the temple platform and understand why later stories can feel like they describe an imposed order. When you live inside an institution that claims divine sanction for its rules, it can feel like the rules came from somewhere beyond human debate. The temple is a human creation, but it speaks with a voice that pretends it is not. As evening comes on, the workers drift home, tired, hungry, wrapped in dust. The administrators linger still, counting still, sealing still, measuring. The divine, meanwhile, remains conveniently silent about the details, leaving humans to argue about fairness on their own. You breathe out slowly, feeling the weight of the place settle. The temple does not roar, it hums. It hums with stored grain, with counted jars, with assigned duties, with the first quiet mathematics of debt. And you continue forward, not rushing, because the story of what comes before the famous arrivals is not a single shock. It is a slow build, a platform raised one brick at a time. The evening cools just enough to make the temple courtyard feel gentle, but the building is still awake. The loud labour has gone home and left behind a quieter kind of work, the work that makes the whole system stick. You slip down a narrow corridor into a side room where reed mats line the floor and an oil lamp flickers. The air smells like damp earth. A scribe kneels beside a tray of wet clay with a reed stylus in hand. You expect a holy revelation. What you get is accounting. The first big leap in human memory is not a love poem. It is a record of who got what and who owes what. Civilization begins with receipts, and you can almost hear the first ancient complaint, "I swear my ration was bigger yesterday." Mainstream historical fact. The earliest known cuneiform writing in Mesopotamia develops in connection with administration, especially tracking rations, livestock and goods. The oldest tablets are dominated by lists and numbers. Writing is born from pressure, not from poetry. The scribe presses the stylus into the clay. Each mark is a small wedge, a tiny footprint that carries meaning. Grain, sheep, jar, a number, a person, a role. You watch a simple world become a coded world, one impression at a time. Writing here is physical. There is no ink pen and no paper. There is texture and drying time. A tablet left in sun hardens fast. A tablet left in shade stays soft. A tablet dropped into a fire becomes permanent, which is funny when you remember most of these early records are basically snack logistics. First light joke. Imagine being the messenger who has to carry a wet tablet across town without smudging it and without dropping it into the canal. One slip and your important message becomes modern art, and you still have to explain it to the overseer. On a shelf, you spot a sealed clay lump that rattles when lifted. Inside are small tokens that represent quantities of goods. The outside is marked so you can check the claim without breaking it open. It is an early security system in mud, and it shows that writing grows out of earlier counting habits. Nearby, another worker rolls a cylinder seal across a tablet, leaving a repeating scene like a tiny woven carpet. That pattern is authority. It says this record counts. It says someone stands behind it. A seal turns clay into a decision that can survive an argument. You start to see the deeper change. The signs do not just describe reality. They organize it. People become categories. Worker, brewer, weaver, overseer. Once your role is written, it becomes harder to argue with. A mark in clay can be more stubborn than a human voice. Quirky tidbit. Some early tablets are clearly schoolwork. Students copy signs again and again, practicing neat wedges in rows. The first writing classrooms are not romantic. They are repetitive. Picture a young apprentice scribe thinking, "I could have been a fisherman," while a strict teacher watches every crooked wedge like it is a personal insult. Historians still argue whether writing emerges primarily from temple-based redistribution systems, or from expanding trade and private transactions, or from both at once. If temples drive it, writing begins as institutional control. If trade drives it, writing begins as a tool for dealing with strangers and obligations across distance. Standing here, you can believe both. A commotion rises at the doorway. A worker complains their ration is short. The overseer insists the measure is correct. The scribe listens, then reaches for a fresh tablet and begins marking. In that moment, you understand writing as a quiet weapon. Once the record exists, the record can settle disputes. And if you control the record, you control which disputes get settled and which ones get ignored. Second light joke. You think of modern customer support asking for your order number. Here, your order number is your dinner. No tablet, no barley, no cheerful mood. You suddenly respect the scribe the way you respect a person holding the only set of keys. You also notice how rare this skill is. Most people in the courtyard cannot read these signs even if they stare at them all night. Literacy belongs to a trained few, and training takes time, food and patience. That makes the scribe valuable and a little dangerous. When only a handful can write the record, those hands can shape the story of fairness. The lamplight glints on the wet clay, and you feel the power of knowledge that is not shared evenly. Outside stars appear. People glance up because humans always do. But here, looking up is also practical. Seasons guide planting. Planting guides harvest. Harvest guides rations. Rations guide tablets. Writing grows alongside the calendar, not because an outsider demands it, but because agriculture demands timing you can trust. Now, a fringe-flavoured candle, some modern fringe interpretations claim, these early signs hide advanced technical knowledge, like coded blueprints pretending to be lists. The grounded view is that the tablets are practical records that later expand into literature, law and ritual. Still unfamiliar marks can feel like a secret when you cannot read them. The scribe sets a finished tablet on a drying mat. The clay holds its shape. The marks hold their meaning. In a world where floods erase boundaries and rumours twist facts, a tablet pins a moment down. It freezes decisions and preserves promises. It also preserves mistakes, which is the part nobody advertises. Third light joke. The oldest conspiracy in history might simply be a misfiled tablet. Somewhere an annoyed worker is convinced the temple is stealing their beer ration. The overseer is convinced the worker is lying. The scribe is convinced everyone needs a nap. As the lamp burns low, the room quiets. Before any later story claims that knowledge descends from the sky, you watch knowledge rise from the ground, pressed into mud by human hands, shaped by barley labour and the stubborn need to remember correctly. The tablets dry, the seals catch the light, and the world becomes readable. The night deepens, and the temple's lamp light fades behind you until it becomes just another warm dot in a landscape of darkness. You walk toward the south, where the land sinks into water, and reeds where the ground stops pretending it is solid and becomes a patchwork of floating life. The air changes. It grows wetter, heavier, full of the sweet rot of plants and the sharp bite of brackish water. Insects sing in layers, and frogs add their own opinion like a choir that never asked you to attend. This is the marsh world, and it feels like a different planet, even though it is only a short walk from the fields. The fields are disciplined. The marsh is stubbornly wild. The fields are rectangles. The marsh is a scribble. And you quickly understand why people here tell stories about hidden beings. The marsh hides everything, including your confidence. Mainstream historical fact: southern Mesopotamia includes extensive marshlands, and water transport becomes a major part of life and trade because rivers and canals connect settlements more efficiently than overland routes. Boats and barges are not luxury items, they are the roads. You reach the edge of a water channel wide enough to carry a reed boat. A fisherman is pushing off with a pole, his body leaning into the motion with practiced calm. The boat looks fragile, but it is built for this environment, light enough to skim through reeds, steady enough to hold nets and baskets. It is sealed with dark waterproofing along seams, and you remember the sticky bitumen smell even if you never want to wear it. You step into another boat with a small group of traders. The boat dips, and your stomach politely requests you stay on land next time. The traders ignore your internal drama. They have cargo bundles of reeds, fish packed in salt jars of oil, maybe a few pieces of crafted goods that will trade well upriver. One of them pats a sealed jar like it is a pet, which is either affectionate or suspicious, and either way you decide not to ask. The boat slides forward. The marsh opens and closes in slow corridors. Reeds brush your arms. Water glints black under starlight. Somewhere a bird flutters up with a sudden clap, and you jump like a tourist, which earns you the mildest smirk from the fisherman. First light joke of the section: you are learning that in the marsh, every noise means either dinner or danger, and you are bad at guessing which is which. As you move, you feel the marsh doing something important for the larger world. It is not just a food source, it is a meeting place. The canals and rivers bring strangers. Boats bring new tools, new words, new customs, new diseases, new gossip, and sometimes new power dynamics. if you want a society to later imagine arrivals from outside you, first need real arrivals from outside. The marsh is the soft border where that happens. You watch the traders exchange information as much as goods. They talk about water levels, about which canal is clogged, about which settlement is strict, with tolls about which leader is feuding with which neighbour. Trade is not just movement of objects, it is movement of stories, and stories change when they travel. Quirky tidbit time. Reed boats are not just practical, they are symbolic. In later Mesopotamian tales, reed boats appear as survival tools, as escape tools, sometimes as sacred vessels. When your landscape is half water, your technology becomes your mythology. Also, reed boats are basically ancient versions of the phrase, "If it floats, it counts." Now the boat reaches a small dock where another group waits. A basket is lifted, weighed by hand, and exchanged for a jar. Someone spits to the side, not as insult but as habit. And you have the strange thought that commerce has always looked like people pretending not to care while caring very deeply. Mainstream fact again, threaded into the scene, long-distance trade networks in early Mesopotamia connect the alluvial plain, which lacks stone timber and metals, with regions that have those materials. This means merchants and emissaries travel, and goods like stone, shell copper, and wood move into cities that would otherwise be trapped in mud. The plain is rich in grain and poor in hard resources, so it has to reach outward. That reaching outward is your second reveal. Before any myth frames outsiders as cosmic visitors, the culture already depends on outsiders. Not aliens, but humans from other lands. People who speak differently, people who dress differently, people who bring unfamiliar objects. A piece of shiny copper looks magical if you have grown up surrounded by clay and reeds. A carved stone bead looks like it fell out of the sky. Fringe-flavoured tidbit, presented as a gentle curiosity. Some modern fringe readings treat the Marshlands as a perfect hiding place for secret facilities or advanced workshops because they are hard to access and easy to conceal. The less dramatic explanation is that marshes are simply practical zones for fishing, reed, harvesting and transport, and their complexity naturally feeds imagination. Humans have never met a mysterious swamp they did not immediately use for rumours. Historians still argue whether early Mesopotamian expansion is best explained by population pressure and economic opportunity, or by organised political control and competition between emerging city centres. In other words, do people spread because they need land and resources, or because institutions push them outward? On this boat, watching goods move and tolls get negotiated, you can feel both forces at work. Survival pushes, power pulls. The boat glides deeper into the marsh, and you catch sight of homes built on slightly raised ground or on platforms, reed huts with walls that breathe. Smoke rises from a low fire. A child stands near the water, watching fish flicker below the surface, utterly calm, like the marsh has adopted them. You envy that calm. You are still thinking about leeches. Here comes your second light joke. You realise the marsh is basically nature's prank. It gives you fish birds and reeds for shelter, and then it taxes you in mosquitoes, heat, and the constant feeling that you are being watched by something that has been here longer than you. The traders stop at another exchange point. A man steps out of a hut holding a small carved object, maybe shell, maybe stone. It catches starlight like a tiny moon. He hands it over, receives grain in return, and you watch value being negotiated across different worlds. The marsh produces certain things, the fields produce others, the city stores and redistributes, the trade route ties it all together. And this is the key reveal of section 6. Before the arrival story, the world is already connected. The Sumerian plane is not isolated waiting for a dramatic visitor. It is already interacting with neighbours, exchanging goods and absorbing ideas. The culture's sense of outside influence does not need to be invented. It is lived. As the boat turns back toward firmer ground, the horizon shows faint light again. Not dawn yet, but the promise of it. The marsh noises soften then surge again, as if the reeds are whispering to each other. You sit low in the boat, listening to water slap against the hull, letting the rhythm settle your body. The marsh is the border between the ordered world and the untamed world, between the known and the unknown. It makes you understand how easily unknown becomes myth, and how easily myth becomes certainty when the reeds hide the details. The waterway carries you out of the thickest reeds and into a quieter stretch where the land firms up in gentle rises. The sky is still dark, but the east is beginning to lighten with that shy, bruised blue that shows up right before sunrise. You step off the boat and your feet sink slightly into damp ground, which is the land's way of reminding you that nothing here is truly dry, it is just temporarily not wet. Ahead you see it. Not a glittering capital, not a dramatic skyline, but a mound that looks like a low hill built by patience, layers of human living stacked over layers of older living. Mud brick on mud brick, floor on floor, broken pots and ash and bones compressed into time. People will later call this place Eridu, and the name will carry weight like a stone in the pocket. You walk closer and feel the atmosphere change. Some settlements feel like work camps. Some feel like markets. This feels like a memory. Even the wind seems to hush a little, as if it knows it is passing over something old and touchy. Mainstream historical fact, Eridu is one of the earliest known settlements in southern Mesopotamia, with significant occupation during the Ubaid period, and it becomes famous in tradition as a primeval city tied to the god Enki, also called Ea, in later contexts. Archaeology shows long sequences of building, including repeated temple construction on the same spot, as if every generation is renewing a promise. You climb the mound, stepping over worn patches where the ground is firm from countless footsteps. You pass places where old walls have melted back into earth, leaving only faint outlines. You see pottery fragments like fallen leaves, a shard with a painted line, a rim that once held water, a base that once sat by a hearth. The past here is not one grand moment. It is 1,000 ordinary mornings. You reach a platform area where a temple would have stood and been rebuilt and stood again. Even if the walls have vanished, the sense of direction remains. A sacred centre pulled into place by repetition, People come here to offer fish grain oil, maybe small crafted objects, not because someone from the sky told them to, but because the community needs a centre where meanings can be stored the same way grain is stored, where you can deposit your anxiety and withdraw a little hope. First light joke, very gentle. If Eridu had a slogan, it would be something like Ancient City Now, with even more temple renovations. Every generation rebuilds, every generation claims it is an improvement, and every generation swears this time the drainage will definitely work. You look down the slope and notice water glinting in channels that feed into wider marshland. Eridu's identity is tied to water, not just practical water, but sacred water. In later ideas, Enki's realm connects to the Abzu, a deep fresh source under the earth, the hidden reservoir that feeds life. Whether you take that as myth or metaphor, the emotional truth is obvious. In this landscape, water is not only survival, water is mystery. Water comes from places you cannot see. You stand near a shallow basin area, maybe a ritual spot, maybe a practical one that later becomes sacred. Your mind drifts into the way people might have described this. The deep waters below the life, rising from unseen depths, the sense that knowledge also rises from somewhere hidden. It is not hard to see why this becomes a birthplace story. If writing is pressed into clay, then belief is pressed into geography. Quirky tidbit: in some early Mesopotamian contexts, fish imagery and fish offerings show up in temple life, especially in places associated with Enki and water. Fish are not just food here. They are symbols of the watery world that keeps everyone alive. Also, fish are annoyingly slippery, which makes them the perfect sacred metaphor for knowledge. You think you have it, then it wiggles away and smacks you in the face. The sun edges up and the mound begins to glow. The air warms. You hear distant birds. A few people move through the area, carrying baskets, sweeping tending fires. It is calm, but it is not lazy. Sacred sites still need maintenance. Even holiness needs janitorial work, which is comforting in a way. Now, the big reveal in this section is not a secret carved sentence. It is a shift in what you consider origin. In many popular tellings, the Anunnaki arrive and then everything begins. Eridu suggests something different. The human tendency to build centres of meaning begins early. The habit of tying authority to a sacred location begins early. The pattern of repeated temple building layer on layer suggests continuity and local development, not a sudden external reset. Historians still argue whether Eridu deserves the title of the first city, in a strict archaeological sense, or whether that label is more about later tradition and ideology than about a single clear starting point. Other sites show early complexity too, and the transition from village to city is more like a sunrise than a light switch. But even if Eridu is not the first, in a literal sense, it functions as a first in the cultural imagination, and that matters because imagination shapes how people interpret everything that comes later. Second light joke: you realise every civilization wants to be the original influencer. Eridu is basically saying, I was doing temples before temples were cool. Meanwhile, other settlements nearby are rolling their eyes and saying, sure you were. And you also invented complaining about your neighbours. You walk along the crest, and imagine the earliest community here. Not huge, but steady. Pottery makers shaping clay, drying it in the sun. Families fishing, gathering reeds, tending small herds. People learning which plants are safe, which waters are sweet, which seasons are cruel. Slowly, routines become traditions. Traditions become rituals. Rituals become institutions. Institutions become the kind of thing that later stories treat as if it fell from the sky. Here is a fringe-flavoured tidbit, presented softly, so it does not wake you up. Some modern fringe interpretations treat Eridu as a kind of hidden launch point for advanced knowledge, suggesting the deep water symbolism points to something literal, like secret chambers or a lost technological repository. The calmer reading is that deep water is a universal human symbol for mystery, fertility and wisdom, especially in landscapes where freshwater sources feel like miracles. But the reason the fringe idea persists is obvious. When a place is called a beginning, people want it to contain a beginning that feels dramatic. You pause by a spot where the ground dips and you see small bits of shell and stone mixed into the soil. Everyday traces, not a grand artifact, but proof of life. This is what beginnings look like in reality. They look like debris. They look like leftovers. They look like the ordinary stuff nobody writes epics about. And yet later texts will write epics about places like this. They will talk about city foundations, divine decrees, sacred plans. They will treat the earliest temples as if they were designed with cosmic intent. Standing here, you can sense the human core under the mythic language. When your environment is harsh and unpredictable, you cling to the idea that your center is stable, chosen, protected. You rebuild the temple not only because it serves a function, but because rebuilding tells you the story is still true. Third light joke. You think about how many bricks it takes to rebuild a temple, and you suddenly understand why so many gods are associated with labour. If you had to haul mud brick all day, you would also invent a divine being who appreciates your effort, if only to feel less annoyed about it. The morning becomes brighter. The marsh glitters. The mound casts a longer shadow. Eridu sits there like a quiet anchor in the landscape, not shouting, not begging to be noticed. Its power is that it has been noticed for a very long time. It holds the kind of deep memory that does not care about modern arguments. It simply exists. And as you step down from the mound, you carry the reveal with you. The world already has roots. The roots are local, layered and human. The sacred centre does not need an arrival to be sacred. It becomes sacred the same way a path becomes real by being walked again and again until the ground remembers. You wake up under a sky that feels too wide for any human promise. The air is cool for a short mercy, and the horizon is a clean line that makes the heavens look impossibly high. Stars fade as daylight pushes them out. You stand near a raised platform and realise the sky is not decoration here. It is a schedule. People are already looking up, not like tourists but like workers checking the time. A thin crescent moon hangs low and trained watchers note its shape and position. They count the nights since it last disappeared, because guessing wrong can mean planting late and eating worry. Mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian communities use a lunar calendar with months tied to the moon's phases, and they sometimes add an extra month to keep the calendar aligned with the seasons. Without that adjustment, the year drifts and the farming rhythm slips. You do not need a telescope to care about this. You need a field. If you plant too early, seed dies. If you plant too late, the heat bakes the grain before it fattens. Timekeeping becomes survival, and survival turns into authority. The person who can declare the new month can also declare when offerings are due and when debts are counted. First light joke you learn. The earliest calendar drama is barley-based. Someone insists the year started yesterday. Someone insists it starts tomorrow. The temple says it starts when the temple says it starts, and everyone suddenly remembers they have other errands. You climb higher to a spot with a wide view. A watcher stands with a straight stick and a practiced eye, tracking where the sun rises and how that point shifts along the horizon over weeks. They watch for bright stars that appear just before dawn and treat those appearances like seasonal announcements. The sky becomes a repeating pattern, and the community begins to behave as if the pattern is instruction. This is the calendar trap. Once the sky becomes a system, it starts to feel designed. When something repeats, your mind wants an author. When the author is invisible, you give the credit to gods. Later readers sometimes hear about this precision and assume it had to be handed down from somewhere else. You feel the temptation yourself because the sky is clean and orderly compared to life on the ground. But then you look down at the plain and remember what people do all day. They dig canals, measure grain, seal jars, and track obligations. Humans do not need heavenly visitors to become obsessed with patterns. Quirky tidbit. The calendar is also a public to-do list. Month names and seasonal markers often tie to agricultural work floods and ritual duties, so time itself becomes labelled with chores. You can almost hear someone muttering, "Great, it is the month of mud again," the one where your sandals become part of the landscape. The watchers compare notes. They argue over haze on the horizon. Their work is half observation and half negotiation, because a calendar is also an agreement. If the community accepts the declaration, the system works. If it rejects it, the system becomes a shouting match under the moon. Second light joke. You begin to suspect ceremonial robes exist for two reasons. One, to look impressive in torchlight. Two, to survive being yelled at when the new month is announced and somebody was hoping to delay a debt payment by a few days. Mainstream fact folded in gently over time, Mesopotamian societies build traditions of recording celestial phenomena, often in connection with omens and ritual. Even when the goal is divination, the practice trains careful observation. The desire to read fate ends up teaching people to notice details with discipline. You watch one of them press small marks into damp clay. Not an epic, just counts. Nights since the crescent, days until a festival, a note about a strange halo around the moon. The marks are plain, and that is the point. The sky becomes familiar enough to log like water levels in a canal. Historians still argue whether early Mesopotamian sky watching is driven mainly by practical agricultural timing or by divination and temple ideology, with farming benefits arriving as a side effect. Do people watch the sky to grow food or to read meaning? And then discover meaning also helps you decide when to plant. Standing here, you can see both. A bad season threatens your stomach. A bad omen threatens your nerves. Both make you stare upward. Now the fringe-shaped shadow arrives because it always does when the sky is involved. Some modern fringe readings treat Mesopotamian astronomical language as a hidden warning system for an extra object in the heavens, often tied to the term Nibiru in later traditions. In that story, calendars are coded alerts. A calmer scholarly view is that celestial terms can shift meaning across texts and contexts, and that later interpretations often stretch older words into newer claims. Third light joke, you imagine a scribe trying to warn the world about a cosmic visitor, and choosing to hide it inside a list of sheep, like sheep, 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 doom, approaching sheep. If that is the method, the warning fails, because everyone falls asleep halfway through the sheep. The sun finally clears the horizon, light spills over fields, and turns canal water into strips of silver. The watchers squint and relax as if they finished a long meeting with the universe, and the universe did not even bring snacks. Someone declares the day count and workers nod, already converting that count into chores. Timekeeping is a way to coordinate people, and that is the reveal that matters here. Before any dramatic arrival, story time itself becomes an institution. The sky is turned into a chart, and the people who interpret that chart become a class. Their declarations shape planting festivals, debts, and legitimacy. When later tales speak about divine decrees and cosmic order, they speak the language of a society that already experiences order as something declared by specialists who can name the moon and count the nights. You stand there and let morning warmth settle into your shoulders. Birds start up again, loud and unapologetic. Work begins again. Above, the blue sky looks empty now, but you know it is full of cycles that will return tonight. The calendar trap closes gently. Once you live by the sky, it is hard not to believe the sky is living by a plan. You walk into a space that feels cooler than the sun-baked streets outside, and your ears notice the silence first. The air smells faintly of dust and old stone. You are in a room where strange things sit under careful light, and people stare at them the way they stare at the night sky, hoping it will explain itself. A small object rests behind a barrier. It is carved worn and stubbornly unimpressed by your curiosity. Nearby, a label tries to translate thousands of years into a few calm words. You lean in and feel the familiar modern itch. What is it? Who made it? Why does it look like that? And the spiciest question of all, could it be something else? This is where the human brain becomes a little dramatic. When you see an artifact without context, your mind tries to complete the puzzle with whatever pieces it already likes. If you like mystery, you see mystery. If you like aliens, you see aliens. If you like bureaucracy, you see receipts. And if you are me, you see a whole lot of people trying to build a serious life out of mud, while also occasionally making extremely weird art. Mainstream historical fact archaeologists interpret objects by context. Where it was found, what layer it was in, what else was around it, how it was made, what wear marks it has, and how similar objects show up across sites. A single object is interesting. A pattern of objects in a consistent context is evidence. You move along the display and you meet a classic troublemaker, a stylized figurine. The head is large, the eyes are emphasized, and the body looks like it was built from simple shapes. If you have ever seen modern internet posts about ancient visitors, you already know the claim. Big eyes equal space being, not a person, not a symbolic figure, not a stylized choice. Obviously an interplanetary co-worker. You lean closer. The surface shows hand shaping. The clay is local. The firing is uneven. There are no hidden microchips. There is just the blunt fact that humans often exaggerate features for meaning. Big eyes can mean vigilance. Big eyes can mean sacred attention. Big eyes can mean this thing is meant to stare back at you in ritual. Big eyes can also mean the artist was not trying to make a realistic portrait, because realism is not always the point. First light joke: if your neighbour makes a figurine with big eyes, it does not mean they met aliens. It might mean they did not have time for tiny details, because they also had to carry water grind grain and argue with the canal. Art is a hobby until hunger shows up, and then your hobby gets simplified. You keep walking, you see cone-shaped pieces that look like little clay bullets lined up in clusters. They are not weapons. They are decorative cones used to create mosaics on walls pressed into plaster in patterns. From a distance, it looks like a textured, shimmering surface, like the building is wearing a beaded coat. This is one of those moments where a modern brain wants to say circuit board, control panel, technological surface. But then you imagine doing it with human hands and human patience, and you realise it is the ancient version of putting tiles on a kitchen backsplash, except the kitchen is a temple and the backsplash is a declaration of power. Quirky tidbit: some of the earliest mass-produced pottery forms in southern Mesopotamia include simple bowls that look almost identical across huge areas. They are plain thick and not very elegant, like a disposable cup that has seen better days. Many scholars think these bowls are tied to ration distribution, which means a humble, boring bowl might be one of the most powerful objects in early urban life. Not because it is beautiful, but because it controls who eats. Second light joke: if you ever wondered what the first viral product was, congratulations, it might be the basic ration bowl. One size fits all, no refunds, and it comes with the exciting bonus of your overseer watching you eat. You stop at a cylinder seal. It is small enough to fit in your palm, carved with a scene so tiny it feels like magic. A banquet, a procession, a figure seated, animals arranged like they are attending a meeting. When you roll it onto clay, the image repeats, clean and confident, like the seal is printing authority into the world. This is where people sometimes jump to the idea of advanced knowledge. How could they carve that? How could they reproduce it? But the ordinary explanation is already impressive. Skilled artisans with hard stone tools practice time, and a society that rewards specialization. A seal is not just art. It is identity, ownership, and legitimacy. It is also portable power, and portable power always finds a way to multiply. Now you pass a display of odd-shaped objects, stone weights, pierced stones, clay nails, little plaques, bits of shell inlays. Some of them look like parts of something, but you cannot see the whole machine. That is the real trap. Many artifacts are fragments of systems that no longer exist in front of you. You are staring at a screwdriver and trying to guess the entire house. Historians still argue whether certain unusual objects and standardized forms reflect centralized control and planned production, or whether they emerge from many communities copying useful designs through trade and shared habits. In other words, is there a strong top-down organizer early on, or does a shared culture spread techniques sideways? The debate matters because top-down feels like a single hand shaping society, while sideways spread feels like many hands shaping it together. You look at an object that often causes modern excitement, a carved stone piece with holes and grooves. Someone online might claim it is a mechanical part, but then you notice the wear marks in places consistent with rope. Suddenly, it becomes a net weight or a tether point, or it becomes a loom part, or it becomes a tool for twisting fibre. In a world built on reeds and textiles and ropes, holes and grooves are not futuristic, they are practical. Here comes the fringe tidbit offered gently. Like a weird bedtime candy you can taste, but do not have to swallow whole. Some modern fringe narratives insist that early Mesopotamian artifacts prove the presence of sophisticated technology, pointing to unusually precise cuts, strange iconography, or objects that resemble modern forms. The calmer response is that skilled craft can look like technology. When you underestimate ancient hands, and symbolism can look like a schematic when you forget that humans love metaphor. Third light joke. If you ever want to start a conspiracy, all you need is one object with a missing piece and a confident tone. You can point at a broken bowl and say ancient engine component, and half the internet will nod like they personally tested it. You move on to a set of figurines that look almost gentle with rounded shapes and careful posture. Some are likely domestic or ritual items, maybe tied to fertility protection or household identity. Here is the ordinary truth that is still fascinating. People in early Mesopotamia carry anxiety everywhere. They are surrounded by risk, floods, droughts, illness, conflict, crop failure. So they build small protective worlds in their homes and temples. A figurine is not proof of visitors, it is proof of worry and proof of imagination. You stop and imagine the hands that made these things. Not abstract hands, but specific ones. A person sitting near a hearth shaping clay while listening to family talk. A craftsperson carving a seal by lamplight, eyes tired, fingers steady. A worker pressing cones into plaster, repeating the pattern until their mind goes blank and calm. The objects are strange to you because you are not the person they were made for. And this is the reveal that matters here. Many of the so-called strange artifacts are only strange when you rip them out of their living context. In their own world, they are normal parts of a system, feeding, measuring, worshipping, marking, ownership, building beauty, managing fear. When you restore the context, the mystery does not vanish. It changes shape. It becomes human. You take one last slow look around. The room is quiet. The objects sit patiently, not answering in words, but answering in patterns. Clay, stone, seal, bowl, cone, figurine. repeated across sites, repeated across generations. The message is not that something impossible happened. The message is that something difficult happened and people got clever enough to leave traces. You step back into the warmer air outside and your eyes adjust to daylight. The world feels less like a riddle and more like a long, steady effort. Strange objects do not need a strange origin. Often they just need you to remember that humans are inventive, symbolic, and a little theatrical even when they are exhausted. By midday, the heat returns with confidence and the ground looks like it is holding its breath. You move into a temple administrative courtyard again, where shade is treated like a luxury product. People sit close to walls and the air smells of clay, sweat and stored grain. A scribe is reading aloud from a tablet, and the listeners have the serious expressions of people who know this is not entertainment. This is legitimacy. He is reciting names, cities, titles, reigns. The cadence is steady, almost musical, the way lists become hypnotic when they are meant to sound inevitable. You listen, and the deeper you listen, the more you feel the problem rising like a bump in the road. Mainstream historical facts. The Sumerian king list is an ancient text that lists kingship as moving between cities and includes rulers with extraordinarily long reigns in its early sections, then transitions to more plausible lengths in later sections. Scholars treat it as a complex document that blends mythic tradition, political ideology, and historical information. You lean in as the scribe's voice rolls on. One king rules for a number so large your sleepy brain tries to convert it into modern terms and gives up. Another rules even longer. The list is not embarrassed about it. The list is confident, it dares you to argue. And here is the reveal that makes modern people reach for the Anunnaki button. Those numbers look inhuman. If you take them literally, you start imagining non-human rulers or beings with longer lifespans or a different biology or a different clock. The list becomes a door, and people love doors. But you are standing here in the heat and you can sense something else. Numbers are not always measurements. Sometimes numbers are symbols. Sometimes they are prestige. Sometimes they are a way to say our origins are ancient beyond counting, and our authority is rooted in time you cannot challenge. First light joke, you realise the king list is the ancient version of a resume that says 10 years of experience required for an entry-level job. The early kings are basically claiming, I have ruled since time was invented, so please respect me. The scribe pauses and presses a thumb into a small clay lump sealing a mark. A listener nods solemnly. Another listener looks slightly bored, which is comforting because boredom proves humanity is consistent across millennia. Now you focus on the structure of the list. Kingship descends, then moves. It is treated like a sacred object travelling between cities. That idea matters. It implies that authority is not just personal skill, it is a transferable divine mandate. If kingship can move, it can also be claimed. If it can be claimed, it can be fought over. The list is a political tool disguised as a memory. Historians still argue whether the earliest portions of the king list preserve fragments of older tradition in some form, or whether those sections are largely ideological invention meant to connect later dynasties to a mythic past. The long reigns could reflect symbolic numbers or different counting systems, or a desire to place certain cities at the centre of sacred history. You step away from the reading and approach a group of administrators discussing the list. They are not discussing it like myth fans. They are discussing it like strategists. Which city is emphasized? Which line of kings is highlighted? Which dynasty is made to look continuous? The list is an argument. It is saying we are legitimate because we are part of the chain. We did not just seize power, we inherited it from the deep past. Quirky tidbit: Mesopotamian number systems include base 60 thinking, which becomes important in mathematics and timekeeping. That sexagesimal tradition is why modern time uses 60 minutes and 60 seconds. When you see big weird numbers in texts, you are also seeing a culture that loves certain numerical structures. Big numbers can be meaningful because they fit a preferred mathematical pattern, not because someone literally lived that long. Second light joke. You picture a king hearing about base 60 and immediately saying, "Wonderful. That means my reign can be huge. Put it on the tablet. Make it impressive. Make it divisible by something fancy." Now the problem in your hands becomes sharper. The user question, the one that pulls you through this world, is what happened before the Anunnaki arrived. The king list forces you to ask arrived from where and when, and arrived in what sense, because in some traditions the Anunnaki are a group of deities not visiting astronauts. In other modern retellings, the Anunnaki are treated as physical beings who come from elsewhere. The king list sits at the intersection of those readings because it talks about a time when kingship is said to be present before the flood and continues after, and it uses numbers that make your mind float away from ordinary human scale. This is a reveal of section 10. The arrival story might not be a single event at all. It might be a later way of interpreting a shift in the narrative framework. When early sections of the king list feel mythic, they do not necessarily point to non-human rulers. They point to a cultural boundary, a line between sacred time and human time. Before that line, time is elastic. Names are archetypes. Reigns are cosmic lengths. After that line, reigns become realistic, and history becomes more like a ledger. You stand in the courtyard and feel how the list works socially. It gives people a shared past. It gives them a ladder of authority. It gives them a way to say, our city has always mattered. It also gives them a way to compress complicated centuries into a clean story. Clean stories are useful. Clean stories keep the population calm. Clean stories keep the taxes flowing. Fringe tidbit delivered softly. Some modern fringe interpretations claim the long reigns are literal because the early kings are not human, or are genetically altered, or are hybrids, or are controlled by the Anunnaki. They argue the numbers are a data point. The scholarly caution is that ancient texts often mix myth and politics, and that numbers can be rhetorical or symbolic. Both sides agree on one thing. The numbers are meant to feel enormous. Third light joke. You imagine an ancient debate where one scribe says, "Should we write that he ruled for 28,000 years?" And another scribe says, "Make it 30. Round numbers look better." The first scribe sighs and says, "Fine, but then you owe me a beer ration. You listen again to the list being read. The voice is steady. The heat hums. The shadows shrink under the sun. The people nod at the right moments. The list is doing its job. It is shaping memory. And you, drifting a little with the rhythm, understand that the oldest parts of the narrative are not a documentary. They are a bridge. They connect the human world of canals, rations, seals and calendars to a deeper sacred past. That sacred past can later be reimagined as an arrival because humans like arrivals. Arrivals are clean. Arrivals are dramatic. Arrivals let you point to a moment and say, this is when it changed. But the king list, with all its impossible years, quietly suggests that change might be a gradual shift in how people tell time and claim legitimacy. Before the flood, in sacred time, kings are almost cosmic. After the flood, in human time, kings are politicians with deadlines and enemies. You step away from the courtyard. The heat presses in. The sun glares off a jar lid. Somewhere a worker laughs at a small joke you cannot hear, and the sound cuts through the seriousness like a splash of water. The list remains behind you, drying in clay, heavy with names and numbers, asking you to believe not only that kings ruled, but that kingship itself is older than ordinary life. The sun slips down again, and the city cools the way a hot stone cools slowly, stubbornly refusing to admit it was ever burning. You walk along a mud brick wall that feels thicker than it needs to be, like the builders were trying to build confidence into the architecture. The wall smells faintly of dust and baked earth. Your hand brushes the surface and comes away gritty, as if the city is leaving a small autograph on you. Inside the wall, voices rise and fall. A courtyard argument, a child laughing, a goat complaining about being a goat. Outside the wall, the plain stretches flat and dim, and the horizon looks like it could swallow you if you wander too far. It is in places like this, where safety is literally stacked into bricks, that heroes start to grow. Because when survival is hard, people do not just want leaders, they want legends. They want someone who feels larger than hunger and flood and war. They want a name that can carry the weight of their fear and still walk. Mainstream historical fact stories associated with Gilgamesh circulate in Mesopotamia for a very long time, with Sumerian poems about him, and later Akkadian versions that form what we call the Epic of Gilgamesh. The character becomes a cultural monument, and even if the tales are mythic, they are anchored in real city life, real kingship and real anxieties about death and power. You walk into a gathering where someone is telling a story aloud. The crowd sits close, not only for comfort, but because the story is warmer when it is shared. The storyteller's voice dips and rises like water in a canal, and you can feel the listeners leaning in at the right places, already knowing the rhythm, already hungry for the familiar beats. The hero in the tale is too strong, too proud, too restless. He builds and fights and demands. He is the kind of ruler who makes the city famous and makes the people tired, which is a very realistic combination. The story says he is part divine, part human. Not because someone ran a laboratory, because myth speaks in symbols. It takes real traits and turns the dial up until the whole room can feel them. First light joke. The hero's biography basically reads like a warning label. May cause excessive wall building, unnecessary monster encounters, and long speeches about personal greatness. Consult your local temple administrator if symptoms persist. The storyteller describes a giant creature in a forest, a guardian of cedar, something massive enough to make your spine tighten. Just hearing about it. The crowd reacts with that delicious shiver people love, but you walking the edge between myth and daily life sense what is happening under the surface. The cedar forest is not just a scary place, it is a resource. Timber is precious in this flat land of mud and reeds. If you want wood for building, you have to reach outward. You have to trade, negotiate, or take. A monster in the forest can be a way of telling a truth without saying it bluntly. Going to get wood is dangerous. Outsiders are dangerous. Conflict is dangerous. So the danger becomes a creature with a name. The story turns supply chain stress into a dramatic opponent you can defeat in words, even if you cannot defeat it easily in life. Quirky tidbit that tastes like fringe but is still grounded in the world. Mesopotamian art sometimes shows protective beings that look half animal, half human, like fish-cloaked sages or bird-headed figures carrying a bucket and a cone, like they are doing ceremonial housekeeping. These figures are often connected to protection and purification. To a modern eye, they can look like costumes or something stranger, and that is exactly why people get excited. But to the people living here, the meaning is closer to this. The world is dangerous, so you imagine guardians that can cross boundaries humans cannot. Second light joke. You cannot help noticing that even the supernatural helpers seem to be doing chores. Bucket cone, serious expression. The divine realm apparently also runs on errands, which is strangely comforting and slightly depressing. As the tale goes on, the hero faces a flood story, a survival story, a warning story about pride. The listeners nod at familiar lines. Some of them have lived floods. Some of them have watched a neighbour's house collapse into wet earth. The myth is not entertainment floating above reality. It is reality wearing a mask. You step away from the crowd and into a quieter street, where the city smells like cooking and dung fires. A worker is hauling water. Another is repairing a roof before the next rain. Nobody here is wrestling monsters, but everyone is wrestling the same underlying forces: scarcity, uncertainty, and the need to keep order. That is where human memory does its most interesting trick. It compresses. It reshapes. A generation remembers a hard year as a curse. Another remembers a war as a battle between champions. A third remembers a migration as an arrival of beings with special knowledge. Real conflicts, trade disputes, raids, and political shifts can become mythic episodes when they pass through enough mouths and enough nights. Historians still argue whether Gilgamesh is based on a historical king of Uruk, and if so, how much of the legend preserves real political events versus later literary invention. In other words, is the hero's skeleton historical, with mythic muscles added later, or is the whole body mostly story built to serve cultural needs? You drift through the city and listen for other names. Lugobanda, the swift one, Emerka, the builder and challenger, kings whose stories mix travel rivalry and divine favour. In these tales, distant lands are not just geography. They are tests, they are mirrors, they are places where the rules change. And this is where later readers sometimes slap a single label on everything and call it interference. A tale about a divine council becomes a tale about visitors. A tale about sages becomes a tale about engineers. A tale about a king chosen by a god becomes a tale about a king installed by outsiders. The older stories, which are often about legitimacy and fear and the thin line between order and chaos, get reinterpreted through whatever lens a later age prefers. Here's the fringe-flavoured tidbit, presented softly so it does not jolt you awake. Some modern interpretations connect the hero and giant motifs to ideas of literal giants, hybrid beings, or off-world manipulation, sometimes blending Mesopotamian traditions with later giant stories from other cultures. The reason it sticks is simple. The texts themselves love extremes. They love heights, depths, long rains, strong bodies, catastrophic floods. Extreme imagery invites literal readings if you want it badly enough. Third light joke. You notice the pattern that every time humans do not fully understand something, they respond by making it either enormous or cosmic. If a tax dispute feels unfair, it becomes a war of destiny. If a king is merely competent, he becomes 2/3 divine. If a road trip is stressful, it becomes a journey through demon territory. Honestly relatable. You pause beside a wall inscription space, not because you can read a full epic carved there, but because you feel the impulse behind carving anything at all. The city wants permanence. It wants its greatness to outlive its mud. Myth helps with that. Myth makes a city bigger than its footprint. You look up at the stars as night settles again. The sky is calm, but your mind is full of loud figures. Heroes who push limits. Guardians who stand at borders. Flood survivors who warn future generations. The story world is thick with beings, not because the people are naive, but because they are smart enough to know life is bigger than a single person and harsher than a single plan. And the reveal you carry forward is this: long before any modern idea of Anunnaki arrival gets pasted onto the past, the Sumerian world already explains power, danger, and change through heroic scale and divine language. The myths are not random fantasies. They are human memory doing its best to make a brutal environment feel narratable, survivable, and meaningful. The city quiets. A dog circles and drops into sleep. A lamp dims behind a reed screen. Your breathing slows. The hero's voice fades into the night, leaving only the steady truth underneath it, that people here are building a world and then telling stories big enough to hold it. Night falls in a way that makes the city feel like it is holding secrets in its corners. The air cools and the alleys fill with the softer noises of evening, a low conversation behind a reed screen, a jar lid clinking a distant splash from a canal where someone is washing up and pretending it is relaxing. You follow the scent of smoke and cooked grain until it mixes with something sharper, foreign and exciting. You find it in the market quarter where goods sit in piles like small miracles, a chunk of stone that does not belong to the mud plain, a piece of wood with a grain pattern too dense to be local reed, a bead that catches lamplight like trapped starlight. You do not need a storyteller to convince you outsiders exist. The objects do the talking. Mainstream historical fact: the alluvial plain of southern Mesopotamia is rich in clay and agricultural potential, but lacks many raw materials like stone timber and metals, so long-distance trade becomes essential. Over time, networks connect Mesopotamian cities with regions that supply copper stone shell and luxury materials. This is not a hobby, it is structural. You step closer to a merchant weighing a small ingot on a balance. The weights are stone-shaped and smoothed, and the merchant's hands move with practiced certainty. Weights and measures are not just tools, they are trust technology. In a world where you cannot scan a barcode, you measure. You measure because your reputation is currency, and you do not want to be known as the person who sells short copper and long excuses. First light joke. You realize the oldest customer review system is just a crowd of people watching you weigh things. If you cheat, you do not get a 1-star rating. You get a very personal argument and possibly a sandal's first chase through the street. The market smells like dust sweats and unfamiliar oils. You hear accents in the voices, different rhythms of speech. Some traders arrive by boat, gliding along canals like they own the water. Others come overland with donkeys and carts that creak like tired bones. Their packs carry the far world into the near world. You watch a merchant unroll cloth, showing tight weaving smooth enough to make you rub it between your fingers. Another presents a small sack of bright stones, maybe carnelian or lapis lazuli, the kind of colour that looks impossible in a landscape of browns and greens. Even if you do not know the origin, you feel the distance in it. These stones had to travel. They had to pass hands, cross boundaries, survive theft, survive weather, survive human mood. Quirky tidbit: some early trade and administration systems use standardized containers and sealings so that a shipment can be recognized as intact. Clay sealings can carry the impressions of multiple seals like a chain of custody in mud. You can almost picture a merchant proudly pointing at a sealed jar and saying, "See, 3 official seals, nobody tampered with it," which is basically the ancient version of a tamper-evident label, except it is also a legal argument. You follow a group of traders to a storage courtyard. Large jars stand in rows. Some are sealed. Some are open, showing grain oil or dried goods. A scribe stands nearby, ready to mark quantities, while an official watches with the calm patience of someone who has seen every trick in the book. Trade is not just exchange, trade is inspection. And this is the reveal you feel in your chest. A connected world grows faster than an isolated one. Once a city can pull copper from one direction, stone from another, and luxury goods from far away, it can build more arm, more decorate more, and claim more. Networks become power. Second light joke: you notice that merchants have always had the same talent. They can describe an object in a way that makes you feel foolish for not wanting it. A bead is not a bead, it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and if you do not buy it now, your grandchildren will somehow regret it. You walk along a canal where a barge is being unloaded. The cargo includes timber beams, precious in this environment. A small crowd forms. Timber means building. Timber means repairs. Timber means expansion. You can feel how materials become destiny. A city that can access timber and metals can dominate a city that cannot. Mainstream fact, woven in naturally in the Uruk period, some archaeologists see evidence of Mesopotamian influence and presence at sites beyond the southern plain, sometimes described as colonies, outposts or trading enclaves. This suggests trade is not only passive exchange, it can involve physical expansion and the spread of administrative practices, including sealing systems and standardized goods. Historians still argue whether this Uruk expansion is best explained as a form of colonization and control, or as a looser network of trade cultural influence and local adoption of Mesopotamian styles. In other words, did southern cities plant themselves elsewhere to manage resources directly, or did neighbours voluntarily join a shared economic language because it was useful? You stand near a trader who is telling a story to potential partners. He describes a far place with mountains where stone comes out of the earth like bones. He describes another place with a coast where shells are gathered and shaped into bright inlays. He describes copper that shines like captured sunset. His descriptions are half truth, half sales pitch, but they do something important. They make the far world feel real to people who have never left the plane. And once the far world feels real, it also feels full of possibility. It becomes easy to imagine knowledge arriving from outside, because knowledge does arrive from outside in human form. New techniques, new tools, new styles, new stories. A new way to shape a pot rim. A new way to fasten a boat plank, a new way to count and seal and measure. Innovation travels. Here comes the fringe-flavoured tidbit delivered softly, so you can keep drifting. Some modern fringe narratives treat certain long-distance luxury materials, precise carvings, or sudden style changes as proof of outside intervention beyond normal human contact. They imagine a single guiding hand behind the network. The calmer explanation is that trade routes can move ideas quickly, and a prestigious style can spread the way a catchy tune spreads, because people want to belong to the modern thing even in antiquity. Third light joke, you realise fashion has always been dangerous. One city invents a stylish seal motif, and suddenly everyone wants it. And now you have to trade twice as far just to keep up with the neighbours. The true engine of history might be envy with better jewellery. You watch an official place a seal on a shipment record. The seal says this transaction is recognised. It also says the institution is watching. In a networked world, control becomes harder and more important at the same time. Goods move, people move, rumours move faster than boats. So the system responds with more documentation, more seals, more standardised procedures. The network creates the need for the tools that manage the network. You step back from the bustle and listen to the city at night. Somewhere a dog barks, somewhere a baby cries, some where a merchant laughs too loudly, confident that profit will keep the fear away. The canal water reflects lamp light, turning the surface into broken gold. Boats glide like shadows. The city does not sleep fully because trade does not sleep fully, and the reveal settles in gently. Before any dramatic arrival story gets pinned to the sky, the plane is already part of a web. The web brings resources that transform cities. It brings strangers who transform habits. It brings ideas that transform belief. The outside is not a single event. It is a constant presence arriving in small pieces, jar by jar, bead by bead, word by word, until the world feels bigger than the horizon. The market noise thins as you drift back toward the quieter heart of the city, where storage rooms breathe cool air and courtyards hold their shadows like water in a bowl. A lamp burns behind a reed screen, and you follow the soft glow the way you follow a low voice in a dark room. Inside, a small group has gathered not for trade, not for rations, but for a story that feels heavier than barley. A reader sits with a tablet and recites in a steady cadence. The words land like pebbles in your mind, making small ripples. The tale is old even to them, but it still has teeth. It is about gods who are tired gods, who are angry gods, who do work and hate it, which is the most human thing any god could do. Mainstream historical fact in Mesopotamian. Creation traditions, humans are sometimes described as being formed from clay, often combined with a divine element, such as the blood of a slain god, with the purpose of taking on labour and service that the gods do not want to perform. In versions of these myths, divine beings complain about digging canals and carrying burdens, and the creation of humans solves that problem by making labour someone else's job. You hear the basic shape. The lesser gods toil, they dig, they carry, they maintain the world's infrastructure like an exhausted workforce. They reach a breaking point and revolt. The higher gods panic because a universe without maintenance is basically a leaking roof that nobody is fixing. Then comes the decision that changes everything. Make humans. Make them from Earth, because Earth is everywhere. Add something divine, because you need a spark. Give them the burden. Give them the duty. Give them the shovel. First light joke. You realise the oldest reason for human existence, according to this story, is not love or enlightenment. It is congratulations, you are hired. Your benefits package includes mud heat and the privilege of keeping the canals from collapsing. The listeners nod as if the logic is obvious, and in their world it is. They live in a system where labour keeps the city alive. Canals need cleaning, fields need tending, temples need supplies, walls need repair. If labour stops, hunger arrives. So a myth that frames labour as cosmic duty does not feel insulting. It feels explanatory. It tells you why your back hurts. It tells you the world was built to require effort. Now you feel the modern itch creeping in, the one that makes people jump from myth to genetics in one breath. The DNA myth. The idea that these texts are describing literal engineering, a laboratory, a designed species, a deliberate modification of human biology by powerful beings. You can almost hear a future voice saying, "See, they made us, they changed our blood, it is all right there." The room stays warm, the lamp flickers, the clay smell is steady, and you notice something important. The language is not technical, it is symbolic, ritual, moral. Clay is not a chemical formula. Clay is the substance of daily life. It is the brick in your wall. It is the bowl in your hand. It is the tablet under the reader's fingers. If you want to describe humans as shaped, formed, and bound to the earth, clay is the perfect image. And blood is not a genetic code in this imagination. Blood is life. Blood is identity. Blood is obligation. When a myth says divine blood is mixed into clay, it is saying humans carry a piece of the sacred burden inside them. Quirky tidbit with a slightly fringe flavour, but still rooted in how people talk, some modern retellings insist that specific Mesopotamian terms are best understood as references to advanced biology or genetic procedures, and they treat creation scenes as eyewitness accounts. The calmer way to hear these lines is that myths often use the most powerful substances available in the culture's vocabulary. Earth, water, breath, blood, name. They are not trying to teach you science, they are trying to explain why duty feels permanent. Second light joke: if ancient gods really ran a genetics lab, you would expect at least one scene where a junior deity spills something important and gets fired. But in these tales, the mess is always moral, never a lab accident. Very convenient for management. The reader's voice continues. The story emphasizes service. Humans are made to carry the yoke. They are assigned tasks. They provide offerings. They keep the temple economy humming. This is the labour story, and it fits into the world you just walk through. A city that runs on redistribution and duty naturally generates a creation tale that justifies redistribution and duty. You look at the listeners. Some are workers, some are administrators, some are temple affiliated. They all share the same tired eyes. The myth does not erase hardship. It wraps hardship in meaning. It says your labour is not random. Your labour is part of the structure of reality. Historians still argue whether these creation myths are best read as reflections of specific social tensions like forced labour, debt, obligations, and temple authority, or as broader theological explanations that later get applied to social life. In other words, do the myths emerge directly from economic pressure and political control, or do they arise from religious imagination and then reinforce the system afterward? Either way, the result is the same. The myth and the society end up holding hands. You step outside for air and feel the night cool your face. In the street you pass a worker returning home, shoulders slumped, carrying a small ration. You pass an official with a seal tucked safely away, moving with the calm of someone who will not be digging canals at dawn. The contrast is quiet but sharp. Myths are not born in a vacuum. They are born in lived inequality and lived cooperation. They carry the shape of the world that tells them. Now the DNA idea returns because it is stubborn. You can see why it appeals. If humans are made, then someone is responsible. If someone is responsible, then your suffering is not just weather and politics. It has an author. And if your nature was designed, then maybe your flaws are not your fault, which is a comforting thought at 2 a.m. in any century. But the text voice in this culture is not offering you an escape clause. It is offering you a duty clause. Humans exist to work, to maintain, to serve. Even the divine element in the clay does not elevate humans into carefree heirs. It binds them deeper. You are not just earth, you are earth with a contract. Third light joke. You suddenly understand why so many rituals involve food and drink. If you are going to convince people their purpose is labour, you at least have to throw a decent festival now and then. Otherwise your workforce starts asking very impolite questions. You notice another detail. The modern engineered human narrative often skips. These myths are not consistent across all texts and eras. Names shift, roles shift. Different gods take the lead. Sometimes the divine element is a specific slain figure. Sometimes the emphasis is on breath or spirit. Sometimes the story leans more toward cosmic battle and political legitimacy among gods. That variation is a sign of cultural evolution, not a single fixed report. And yet the themes hold steady. Work is heavy. Order is fragile. The powerful want the world maintained. The maintenance requires bodies. Humans become those bodies. The creation myth makes that arrangement feel as old as the sky. You stand by a canal at night and listen to water moving with a soft slap against the bank. It is calm now, but you know what it demands by day. It demands clearing. It demands gates. It demands vigilance. You can see why a myth would place canal labour in the mouth of gods. When a job is big enough, it feels cosmic. The reveal you carry here is simple and strangely sobering. The most famous creation scenes that people point to when they talk about engineered humans are not mainly about DNA. They are about labour and obligation. They are about explaining why people work for institutions that claim sacred authority. They are about turning the daily grind into a cosmic arrangement so that you accept it not only as necessity but as destiny. The lamplight in the city dims. A dog settles into sleep. Someone laughs, once softly, then stops as if they remembered tomorrow. You let the canal's rhythm slow your breathing. The story does not feel like a blueprint. It feels like a mirror held up to a society that already knows the truth. The world runs because someone hauls the burden. The only question is, who gets to call it holy? The next day arrives with a thin wind that carries dust like a quiet warning. The city feels restless, not chaotic, just in motion, as if everyone is shifting a few inches to make room for something new. You walk through a temple corridor where wall plaster is being patched, where a new symbol is being painted over an older one. The old marks are not erased completely. They show through like faint bruises under fresh skin. This is how belief changes in real life. Not with a single announcement, but with edits. New names layered over old names. New titles attached to familiar powers. Old stories retold with different emphasis. The gods do not move like armies. They move like language. Mainstream historical fact over long periods, Mesopotamian religious traditions evolve and blend with deities gaining new attributes, shifting in status and being identified with other deities across regions and languages. Political changes, city rivalries and cultural contact all influence which gods rise in prominence and how myths are told. You stop near a small shrine space where an official is speaking to a group of workers. He is not delivering philosophy. He is giving instructions for a festival. Offerings must be prepared. Processions must be arranged. A specific hymn must be recited. A specific day must be observed. This is the ordinary engine of religion, and you realize that ritual is one of the most powerful forces in history because it is repetitive. Repeat something long enough and it becomes reality in the mind. First light joke. You realize that if a god wants to become important, they do not need lightning. They need a calendar slot. Once your name is attached to a yearly feast, you are basically immortal. People will forget their cousin's birthday before they forget the feast that comes with beer. You wander into a scribal room and see tablets being copied. The same story, the same list, the same hymn written again. Copying is preservation, but copying is also adaptation. A scribe can choose a word. A scribe can choose a spelling. A scribe can choose which name to emphasize. Over generations, these choices accumulate, and the story shifts without ever feeling like it shifted. You notice the divine council language, the way groups of gods are described like a governing body, assigning fates, issuing decrees, dividing responsibilities. For a society that runs on temple administration, the divine realm naturally resembles administration. That is not proof of visitors. It is proof of projection. Humans build institutions, then imagine the cosmos as an institution. Quirky tidbit gods in Mesopotamian tradition often have very specific job descriptions and relationships to places. A god is not just a cosmic being. A god is tied to a city, a temple, a river, a craft, a boundary. That local anchoring makes divine politics feel like human politics, because it is human politics translated into sacred terms. If your city rises, your god rises. If your city falls, your god suddenly becomes less fashionable. Second light joke. You picture a god sitting in a celestial meeting complaining, "Why do I keep getting assigned the swamp district?" And another god saying, "Stop whining. At least you get offerings." Meanwhile, a junior deity is stuck managing insects, which is clearly the worst portfolio. Now, the reveal you are approaching is the moment when later readers might call it arrival. Not necessarily a physical landing, but a narrative shift. When a new power rises, when a city becomes dominant, its god becomes central. Names that once belonged to one region can be absorbed into another region's system. Titles can migrate. Functions can merge. You see a tablet where a familiar divine name is paired with a new epithet, like a title upgrade. The same figure is now described as higher, older, more authoritative. It is a subtle move, but it changes how people imagine the hierarchy. Mainstream fact folded gently as Mesopotamian history progresses, shifts in political power among cities such as Uruk or Lagash, and later larger empires correlate with changes in religious emphasis and the prominence of certain deities in state ideology. Religious narratives often serve to legitimize rulers and institutions. Historians still argue whether religious change in Mesopotamia is primarily driven from the top down by rulers and temples, or from the bottom up through popular practice and local tradition that elites later formalize. Both forces likely interact. People keep old habits, leaders promote new ones. The result is a blended religion that feels ancient even when it has been updated. Here comes the fringe-flavoured tidbit offered softly. Some modern readers treat the shifting names and titles as evidence of a real group arriving and taking over, as if a new set of beings replaced an older set. They read changes in divine hierarchy like a political coup among literal entities. The calmer reading is that theology shifts with human politics, cultural mixing, and the evolution of mythic language. You walk past a wall where a new symbol is painted in a slightly different style. The pigment is fresh. The lines are confident. The artist is following a new template. You realise belief is not only what people think, it is what they see every day. A symbol on a wall becomes normal. A normal thing, come, becomes unquestioned. An unquestioned thing becomes the foundation for the stories your grandchildren will treat as eternal. Third light joke. You imagine the first person noticing the new symbol and whispering to their friend, "Did they change the god's logo again?" And the friend whispering back, "Yes, and we are supposed to pretend it has always been that way." You move into a courtyard where a procession is being rehearsed. Drums thump softly. A singer tests a line of a hymn. Workers carry a platform stand. The ritual is theatre, but it is serious theatre. It tells people who they are. It tells them what powers rule the world. It tells them what to fear and what to hope for. It also tells them who is in charge right now. This is where the concept of arrival becomes emotionally satisfying. If a society experiences a major shift, a new dynasty, a new city, dominating a new administrative order, it can feel like something has arrived. A new era arrives, a new authority arrives, a new divine arrangement arrives. Over time, that feeling can be expressed in myth as a literal coming down of gods or a new assignment of roles among the divine. You stand under the shade of a wall and feel the wind carry dust across your face. Dust settles on everything here. It settles on bricks. It settles on pots. It settles on tablets. It settles on memory. The only way to keep memory clear is to keep rewriting it. That rewriting is not always dishonest. Sometimes it is survival. A new ruler needs legitimacy. A new city needs a sacred pedigree. So the gods are retold in a way that makes the present feel fated. The reveal in this section is that what later people interpret as a sudden arrival may actually be the gradual accumulation of name shifts, title shifts, ritual shifts, and political shifts. The gods do not enter the story like strangers walking through a gate. They enter like edited lines in a familiar script, until one day the audience swears the script has always been this way. As evening comes, the procession rehearsal ends. People laugh quietly, then return to seriousness. Someone adjusts a garment. Someone fixes a drum strap. A priest checks the calendar day again because ritual timing is everything. You leave the courtyard and walk towards the edge of the city where the fields begin. The sky turns orange. The canal water reflects the colour like a ribbon. You breathe slowly and let the idea settle into your chest. Names change. Titles shift. Gods merge and separate. Humans respond by telling smoother stories about it, stories with clear turning points. Arrival stories are one way to smooth the mess. The wind softens, the city quiets, and you keep moving, carrying the sense that the biggest changes in human history often happen the way plaster is applied on a wall, layer over layer, until the old shape is still there, but no one points at it anymore. Night settles over the plain like a warm blanket that still smells faintly of river mud. The city quiets in layers. First the market voices fade, then the last footfalls in the alleyways soften, then even the dogs seem to decide they have done enough supervising for one lifetime. You sit where you can feel a little breeze and you let your thoughts gather the way canal water gathers in a still pocket. You are here for the reveal, the one you can live with, not the one that makes the loudest thumbnail. The strongest clue is also the least dramatic. The world that later readers call Sumer already has structure before any supposed arrival. You have fields that demand timing, canals that demand coordination, temples that demand accounting, and writing that begins as a tool for tracking real obligations. That does not feel like an empty stage waiting for someone to step onto it. It feels like a society already carrying itself heavy and clever long before any later label gets attached. Mainstream historical fact, Sumerian literature and administrative texts develop over long periods with different genres, different purposes, and different layers of tradition, and scholars treat many of the grand origin stories as mythic frameworks that reflect social realities rather than straightforward chronicles of events. When you read a creation tale or a king list, you are often reading ideology, theology, and memory braided together. Now you look at the Anunnaki name itself and you feel how slippery the ground becomes. In many Mesopotamian contexts, the Anunnaki are a group of deities associated with the divine order, sometimes connected with the underworld, in later ideas sometimes appearing as a collective in mythic scenes. That is not the same thing as a historical record of visitors landing, unpacking equipment, and redesigning humanity. It is a different category. It is sacred language. It is how a society talks about power, fate, and obligation when power is real and fate is terrifying. First light joke because you deserve it. If divine beings truly did arrive to optimize human life, they left a lot of obvious bugs in the system. Mosquitoes still exist. Back pain still exists. And you are still paying for basic necessities, so whatever cosmic upgrade happened, it came with a subscription fee. The second clue is the way the stories are shaped. Flood traditions create a boundary between sacred time and human time. King lists stretch years into numbers that feel meant to impress, not meant to be measured with a sundial. Creation myths frame labour as destiny, because labour is what holds the world together here. When you put these together, the pattern you see is not a sudden outside intervention. It is a human culture explaining its own harshness by projecting its institutions into the sky. Quirky tidbit that stays true to how humans actually behave. Those little cylinder seals are basically portable authority, and they create a world where identity and legitimacy can be rolled into clay in seconds. That tiny object can change how power works because it makes control repeatable. If you want a realistic lever that transforms society, it is not a spaceship. It is a seal, a measure, a record, and a room where only a few people can write them. Second light joke. You imagine an ancient official saying, "I do not need muscles. I have a seal." Then he rolls it once, and suddenly everyone stands straighter. That is the original remote control. Still, uncertainty remains, and you do not have to pretend it does not. The past here is layered like those temple platforms, and every layer includes both living truth and story truth. Historians still argue whether certain texts preserve genuine memories of specific events, like major floods or political transitions, or whether they are primarily later compositions that use older themes to serve newer needs. Even the language changes over time and meaning slides with it. A word that sounds like a technical term to a modern ear might be a poetic title in an ancient mouth. So what happened before the arrival, if you insist on phrasing it that way? The calm answer is that the conditions for an arrival story were built slowly. People were already managing water, already specializing labor, already organizing surplus, already using writing to lock obligations into clay, already telling myths that made duty feel cosmic, already trading with distant lands, already watching the sky to keep the seasons from drifting, already reshaping belief as politics shifted. In that world, the idea of powerful beings assigning roles and measuring fates is a reflection of how life actually feels. It feels assigned. It feels measured. It feels like someone higher up is always setting the terms. Fringe-flavoured tidbits offered gently and not as a claim. Some modern interpretations treat the Anunnaki stories as literal reports of engineered humans and visiting rulers using the long rains and creation scenes as evidence. The more cautious interpretation is that these are mythic statements about hierarchy and labour amplified by symbolism and later retellings. The texts can feel like they are whispering secrets because they are written in a language that is not yours, and anything unfamiliar can sound like a code. Third light joke. You realise that if you really want to hide a world-changing secret, the best place is inside a long list. Most people will fall asleep around sheep number 12 and your secret will be safe forever. You let the night breathe around you and you allow the reveal to be a little human and a little unresolved. The oldest Sumerian memory does not need a single dramatic moment to explain itself. It already contains the ingredients that later become dramatic in retelling. A harsh landscape, a need for order, institutions that feel sacred, specialists who declare time, measure food, and seal legitimacy into clay. Myths that dress these forces in divine language so that people can endure them without snapping. And if you want one final steady thought to carry into sleep, it is this. Before any beings arrive in story, humans arrive in reality again and again every morning. Stepping into mud, lifting baskets, counting rations, repairing canals, raising walls, shaping clay, naming the sky, and building a world that later generations will call impossible. Now the pace slows with you. Your breath becomes quieter. Your shoulders drop. The city is mostly still, and the plain beyond it is a soft, dark ocean of land. Somewhere water moves in a canal, not rushing, just continuing like a low lullaby made of small slaps and gentle pulls. The reeds whisper when the breeze passes through them, and the sound is steady enough that your mind stops trying to solve everything. You picture a tablet drying in the shade, its marks holding a moment in place. You picture the moon sliding across the sky, keeping its patient rhythm. You picture fields sleeping under night air, waiting for the next sunrise that will bring both work and food, both struggle and proof that the system continues. And you let yourself accept the softness of not knowing every detail. Not knowing can be calm when you stop treating it like a threat. The past does not demand that you win an argument tonight. It only invites you to sit with its textures, the mud, the water, the quiet labour, the stories that make meaning out of effort. Your eyelids grow heavier. The air feels smoother. The distant city noises fade into a low hum. You are safe here, floating above ancient ground in your imagination, watching the river world settle into darkness, watching the sky hold its patterns without asking you to decode them. You take one slow breath in, then another out, and the images soften at the edges like lamplight dimming behind a reed screen. The canals become silver lines, then gentle shadows. The temple platform becomes a shape, then a suggestion. The clay tablets become warm, quiet squares, then simply the idea of memory resting. And as you drift down into sleep, you carry the calmest reveal of all. Whatever names people gave the powers above and below, whatever stories they told to survive the day, the world, before any arrival, is still a world of human hands, steady and stubborn, shaping meaning from mud shaping tomorrow, from today, one quiet rhythm at a time.